All right, you're watching Liquid Lunch on Biz TV. I'm Frank Morano. John Tobacco will be back momentarily after changing his shirt, fresh off the scene of the reopening of Sunbelievable Tanning Salon. Will it reopen tomorrow? Who knows? You'll watch this program to find out. Well, lucky us, we get to hear it from the left and the right about all the issues that are that you're talking about at the water cooler, if you have a water cooler at home, because you're probably not talking about it at the water cooler at work. We have Democratic attorney and district leader Josh Kravitz from New York City and longtime Republican consultant Robert Hornak. Gentlemen, glad you're both healthy. Glad you're both well. I know you both had some challenges over the last few months. I'm glad you're doing okay. It's good to have you both back. Robert, let me begin with you. President Trump is at war with his favorite social media platform, Twitter, which the president has used better than I think anybody. I don't think that's going too far to say, in order to build political support. Twitter has now put a fact check on a couple of his tweets that have to do with mail-in voting. The president's coming out today. He's issuing an executive order, which apparently Twitter is not going to like. Do we know for sure what the executive order is going to say? And give us your take on this whole Trump versus Twitter battle.
No, we have no idea yet what the executive order is going to say. They were signaling some things earlier in the week that it might say, but they also said that the final draft will come out on Thursday at some point. As far as I know, it has not come out. But look, Frank, this is not the first time that we have discussed this issue on your show, and this has been an ongoing issue. I know, thousands and thousands of people, as you do. I know many who have been banned or temporarily banned or censored on Twitter and on other social media platforms. Every one of them that I know that has been censored is a Republican. They're a conservative. They're expressing conservative viewpoints. I don't know a single person left of center in any way that's ever been censored on Facebook or Twitter. The problem that we've discussed before, and the problem that is still ongoing, is that platforms like Twitter, they want to be treated like they're public utilities, like they're the phone company or the electric company, but they're not. Okay, they are editing and editorializing on their content. They want to control what's being said, especially right now as we're approaching the 2020 presidential election. They seem to want to exert control at Twitter over the political messages that are being put out. They can't have the immunity from prosecution and from lawsuits, not from prosecution, but from lawsuits, like a public utility has, and also be an editorial content controller and editorialize their positions.
Well, there have been some left of center Twitter accounts that have been suspended or removed. So it's not a purely one-sided thing. But Josh, well, okay, I don't know the percentages. I don't know. And you know what? When you deal in the kook fringe, it's tough to tell who's left and who's right, even sometimes when people are very vocal about expressing their political opinions. Josh, let me ask you, so Twitter puts this disclaimer on these Trump tweets about mail-in voting, and yet a Chinese Communist Party official was able to put out tweets essentially blaming America and the CIA for the spread of the coronavirus, and yet there was no fact check on them on there. Is Twitter playing a dangerous game here by selectively fact-checking certain government officials and not others?
Well, I think it's an interesting point, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to American democracy, right? I don't really understand what the relevance of bringing up a Chinese official is.
Well, because he's on the same social media platform the president.
Right, I understand, but we're comparing two different things right now. We're comparing the leader of the free world who's messing with the Democratic election coming up in November. And I'm sorry?
Messing with?
Oh yeah, he doesn't want people. No, he's not putting his position out there. But even still, let alone this instance, what about the fact that the president is just an abusive Twitter user? What about the fact that he wakes up one morning and he says Mika Brzezinski's face is bleeding? Right.
So Josh, let's say everything you say is correct. Let's say everything.
No, it is correct because he said it.
Okay. Well, let's say rather than parse every single one of the president's Twitter transgressions,
there are thousands, by the way.
Rather than parse every single one of them, what should Twitter be in the fact-checking business? If we're going to fact-check Trump, should every public official?
I don't really have an opinion on that. But what I do think is abusive language, which sometimes happens on the left. In fact, I have a very dear friend who's on the left, who has been suspended from Twitter several times, and because he's done abusive things, and he should have been. And the same for Trump. Abusive language, not political language, and for sure should be taken out of the discourse. Then when you're in a position of power and you're in a position to basically mold truth for people because you're the leader of the free world, and you give false information like, hey, don't wear a face mask, that can actually kill a person, you're putting people's real lives at risk. That's speech that becomes action, that becomes dangerous to people's lives or danger to our republic. So it's not a joke. And he should have been banned from Twitter a long time ago. And so should anyone who's ever uttered an abusive utterance on Twitter.
Right. I guess my question was more about what Twitter should be doing.
I don't know the double
and what
standard.
regulations
I don't know.
should be
I don't know. I don't
forced
work
to
for
adhere
Twitter.
to.
I don't work for Twitter. I don't know. The First Amendment in the law is very complicated in trying to understand the standard. And I'm not going to tell Twitter, and we don't know what the standard is. We have to think it through. But obviously abuse should be the standard, and the president is an abuser of the platform.
Okay, let me ask you then, Josh, I'll begin with you here, about mail-in voting. We saw a bunch of elections take place in New Jersey entirely by mail. The governor of New Jersey is talking about doing the New Jersey election for the presidential primary and maybe even in November entirely by mail. This would be something we haven't seen in New Jersey or New York ever. Other states like Nebraska have a lot of experience with mail-in voting. Do you have any concerns that the increase in mail-in voting, especially by states that don't necessarily have the infrastructure to handle widespread mail-in voting, could lead to increased voter fraud on either side?
I think the thing is you have to weigh the balance of the equities, right? The other option is that we have an election where 10% of the people come out to vote, or some huge percentage of people don't vote because they're afraid to go to the polling place. So when you weigh the balance of the equities, on the one hand, you have an election where the person who wins doesn't have a mandate because 10% went out to vote. And on the other hand, you have vote by mail, which we've seen in other states. And the instances of fraud may be greater than it is if people are actually showing up in person. But the instances will be so small that when you're weighing the balance, it's better to have, and whether it's a Republican or a Democrat who's elected, you want that person to have a mandate. You don't want a situation like we have now where the president is elected constitutionally and not democratically and lost with 3 million votes. And everyone on the left resents him and doesn't even respect his authority.
Robert, how concerned are you about voter fraud if we see widespread voting by mail in these different states?
I'm extremely concerned about it, and everybody should be, and I'll explain to you why. First of all, what Josh said doesn't bear out in the facts. Just from this last primary season that we've seen in special elections, vote by mail is up tremendously by people who request it. So there's no indication that we need to do some kind of blanket mail-in voting, because people, if they don't want to go to the polls, are free to request the ballots and they will be mailed to them. What you're going to see, we know that there are problems with the integrity of our voter lists. They're not purged the way they should be. And what you're going to find is tens of thousands, possibly millions of ballots being sent out to people that have already passed away, that have moved, that are not active voters any longer. And those ballots are going to be floating around. Look, we know that voter fraud is already a problem. There have been books written about it. There have been articles documenting all the cases of voter fraud, not all the cases, but many of the cases of voter fraud. I'm sure there are many that haven't been discovered. But what we're going to find is that with these ballots floating around, look at the case that we just had in, I think it was Pennsylvania. Was it?
Well, North Carolina is where they tried to commit voter fraud to elect the Republican candidate, and they had to essentially redo the election. Yep. So we have seen.
And it's funny, isn't it? Isn't it funny that the Republican Party likes to? The Republican Party likes to focus on voter fraud as if it's only black and brown people in the inner city who are just.
No, not at all, Josh.
Meanwhile, of course, it was rural North Carolina's 9th district, I think it was. That was where the voter fraud was happening. Meanwhile, if I remember correctly, because you can say that they wrote books about it, they may have written books about it, but if I understand correctly, there have been 30 instances of confirmed voter fraud in the last 10 years. And
that's
our best knowledge of it.
Okay, we're going to take a break there. We'll continue on this and get into the George Boyd situation when we return. I also want to get these gentlemen to weigh in as to who Joe Biden should pick on as his running mate. Apparently now he's not going to make a pick until August. Initially, we thought it was going to be a lot earlier than that. And we'll ask both of these gentlemen to put on their political consultants' caps to see what else Biden could do to win and what else Trump can do to win. You're watching Liquid Lunch on Biz TV. I'm Frank Morano. We'll continue to mix it up right after this.